So, what a pleasure. It's been a while, Henry. Wonderful to be the follow-up act to an incredible scholar and speaker. Sangeeta, Sam, buddy. My first trip to Kentucky, and it's been eye-opening. This is a terrific initiative. Henry has just showed us the world of the imagination. I think we share interests in narrative, that'll come out. We share interests in mobilizing the stories that people have. I'm coming at it more from the documentary perspective, the real, so to say. And just to start with a question, like where do our languages come from? They're complex systems, language. Our religions, incredible mythologies, quite diverse as you span the world. Our great narratives, it seems like we have a lot of particular stories, but in fact they boil down to actually kind of not that many in the end. Where have those come from? Who authored them? Who owns the IP on language, on religion? One of the really interesting things to me is that the bigger the system, the harder it is to sort of locate an author. The author is an invention of the late 17th century. It coincides with the ability to turn what is written into property, intellectual property. The rise of capitalism and the rise of the ownership of the word through the author fall together. I like authors, don't get me wrong, this is not a diet. I read like crazy. I am an author. I'm not here to trash authors, but I am here to say that there are dynamics in our world, creative ways of being creative together that have actually made our most complex systems and that we've forgotten. Like in the forest, you know, when the big trees grow up, that undergrowth kind of suffers. You don't see it anymore, it doesn't get light. What happens if you move a tree or two? That bottom space can thrive. So the point I'm going to talk about co-creation, a methodology for working together to find these stories and to construct worlds. And just point one is, this is really ancient. Like, this is our operating system. Actually, the twist happens when a certain economic logic takes over at a certain point in time. This is an alternative to single author systems, but it's not to, again, not to eradicate it. And again, I want to emphasize, the more complex the issue, the more co-creation is important. So if you think of COVID, that curse of a couple of years ago, how that was cracked was not some genius who walked into the lab and said, I've got it, a eureka moment. This was labs around the world, including in China, where scientists risked a lot to leak information to the rest of the world. Scientists working together around the planet to fix a problem that we didn't really know how severe it would be. It's a great example of co-creation. So, a lot of ways to talk about this. I'm coming at it from a media perspective. And what I would say is, in the world of documentary, typically you make documentaries about a problem or a person or a thing. Or you make documentaries for a poor community or for the cause that you're interested in. No. This is about making documentaries with. This is about getting together and saying, what needs to be documented? What needs to be made? What's the story? And working with the community to come up with that, not imposing it on them, not making it for them with the best of intentions and trying to sell it back, but actually making it with them. That's the shift that this is talking about. If you're interested, all this stuff, this is a book that just came out with MIT Press, and it's free. I mean, it's the book, physical book you have to buy, but if you want to read it, it's online and it's free. It's an open access book. And basically, this goes into the methodologies of sort of thinking about this, of doing it, of practicing it. We'll talk a bit about it. A lot of folks helped us with this, and I have to just call out Ford Foundation and MacArthur Foundation, who were particularly helpful in getting this done. And where this work happens, and if you're interested, you can just Google this, but the co-creation studio at the Open Documentary Lab, basically, Kat Cizek, who runs that, and myself, we've kind of led this project. And what we do every day is test it, push it, see where it works, where we can take it. So there's been a ton of iteration since that book came out a year ago And you can find quite a bit of it there. But we're working together with community leaders, with media makers, with scholars, with movement builders. And what the book maps, not that I'm going to do that here, but what the book maps is how does co-creation work in communities? So we did a lot of work, for example, in Detroit, some work in West Virginia. We worked with communities to sort of see how that dynamic plays, but also worked with organizations to see how interdisciplinarity, hackathons, things like that allow co-creation to occur. And finally, we worked with non-human systems, so termites, animals, artificial intelligence systems. How can we work with these systems rather than seeing them as threat? AI is a great example right now. There's a lot of concern, rightly, a lot of concern about the state of AI, but there also needs to be a critical embrace. Like, there are incredible possibilities here. So how do we find those? How do we find those and actually come out stronger for it rather than, basically trying to close our eyes or exploit it? So anyway, that's what the book goes into. And basically tries to argue there's a spectrum. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Co-creation can be something where you're working primarily with the community as a media maker, or where you're working primarily as a media maker and trying to find a community that you can work with. There's a lot of ways to do this. Ideally, co-creation hits the happy center there. But like I already argued with religion and with language and some kinds of storytelling, this is in fact in our blood. It's in our system. And if you think of how bee is such a great example here, how apple bees or quilting bees or barn building endeavors, these are great examples of communities pulling their resources together to make something that no one individual could actually pull off. And it's that tradition that we really need to kind of rediscover and make a little more prominent in our work. So just to summarize that, I would say this is something it's bound up in our system. It's in our DNA. Let's tune into it. In the digital era, we have tools that can really facilitate this. Yes, we can use the internet to buy stuff from Amazon, but there's a lot of other stuff the internet can do as well. It binds us together. It's a network. So how to use these new tools to actually reinforce this part of us rather than simply, using it to sort of enhance the old model. And we're seeing, from Napster on up, we're seeing that actually the capacities of the network are kind of antithetical to centralized ownership and centralized profit making. So instead of trying to force this technology into the old logics of a 18th and 19th century economic model, let's try to find out what else it can do. That's the hope here. And finally, what's so important in this is that process, the act of doing something, that's the moment of transformation. It's not waiting for the product to come out. Sometimes the product doesn't even matter. But the process of working together with people, of listening to people, of being informed by what one another's views are, even if we disagree, can lead to something far more productive than a mere, in my case, documentary or whatever. So process really outweighs product. This is not a panacea. There's a lot of things that can go south with this. Communities can be exploited. Their ideas can be sort of harvested and sold back to them. So a bunch of stuff to worry about, but basically, you can read the book for that. So what I want to talk about, just spend a few minutes on, is like the point of intersection in a way with what Henry talked about with civic imagination and with narrative change. It's not the same language I use, but actually it turns out to be kind of the same terrain. So one of the techniques we've been using a lot is called worlding. And worlding is, I'll show you some definitions in a second, but it's really, there's like a ton of contradictory definitions. And I'll tell you what we mean by it. But basically, this is something we've been doing a lot of in the last couple of years as a lead into the book and when the book came out. Working, for example, with indigenous communities and questions of climate change. Indigenous communities, many of whom inhabit kind of spaces that were unwanted by the colonizer are kind of the first to feel the effects of drought or climate crisis, and really have some great insights, both because of their legacy, but also because they're poised on the frontier of the most egregious forms of climate crisis. So we've been doing a lot of work with them in terms of imagining like what fixes could be, how to think through alternative development scenarios, and how to give that form. And so that's worlding. We'll talk about this in a sec. So worlding goes everywhere from like daydreaming, that's kind of, in a certain sense, how we use it, to sort of very critical uses. Spivak talks about it as what happens when the colonized think in the language of the master. They've been worlded. It's kind of a bad way to think about it. For us, really, though, it's a way to, it's kind of like iteration. Talk about this in a sec. If you think of how products are made, there's ideation. People get a brainstorm. Hey, wouldn't this be cool? We could do it this way. We could do it that way. Then there's prototyping, where you kind of try it. Here's a way to make it. Here's another way that's even cheaper to make it or better to make it. Creation, where you actually make a product, and then you see, could be improved. We'll iterate a little bit. The part worlding is really about ideation. It's about how do ideas take form in the world. And yeah, co-created ideation, not one person's ideation, but a community's is worlding. And so for us, what's really important is thinking about worlding as a process where you bring together everyone in the community. You find your critics, you know who's going to complain about this development, and invite them to the table, so that together you can say, well, what's going to work and what's going to be horrible? And how can we mitigate that? How can we find a middle ground? How can we think creatively together to find a way to solve this problem? Not, I'm coming to you with these shiny new plans and you're going to love it. Because, that's, I think most of us know that doesn't always work. But it's far better to anticipate the problems by working with the people that are going to generate those problems. And let them be part of the process too. Let them be part of imagining the way into a situation or out of a situation. So we've been doing this. Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a big project with NASA and with NOAA at MIT at the Media Lab, where we led a whole process. This had to do with climate change. NASA is a big polluter, as you might imagine, and they're concerned about it. It's their world too. And you can see from the little grid at the bottom, is there a blow up? No. The co-creation and storytelling sort of come together. The stories that emerge are kind of a articulation, a concretization, not quite a prototype, but they give something a sort of a solid form. Anyway, this was really successful. We do a lot of stuff in our lab, and it's not often that people come back and say, we have a lot more money for you. We love what happened, and there's more. So that's really reassuring at some level that it worked with the NASA people. I want to give you a couple of concrete examples. This is a project by Carla Bishop, who's a wonderful documentary maker. She was based in Oklahoma for a long time, just moved to the University of Arizona. And basically in Oklahoma, probably some of you have heard of Tulsa and the black community there that was pretty much wiped out, physically wiped out. Military airplanes coming in and like shooting people in the streets, a tragedy. But it turns out there were a lot of black majority communities in Oklahoma. And what Carla did was, when she was based there, go to these communities and kind of do some historical research, and found amazing stories. So her research methodology was really cool. She enlisted young people who didn't know much about this and just wanted to do what young people do, like dance and forget about the misery of the world, and hire them to interview the old folks, to interview their grandmothers, to interview their aunts and uncles, and find the stories of when this had been a prospering black community or whatever it had been. To find those stories, to go to the library and correlate it and check it out, to find images, to find artifacts. And then what Carla did that was really brilliant was she used a lot of augmentation strategies, augmented reality, geolocated stories. You could stand in front of a building and hear what it used to be. or projection on buildings at night, where they would project old photos of how it used to be back when this was a thriving, if it was a black enterprise or whatever. To take the stories that they found from all these individuals that informed these kids about history and rooted them in their communities, and use that as a springboard to think ahead. Like, well, what could we be? What could come next? What's the next chapter? So it's a really, to my mind, a really striking project. I mean, these are some of the communities that she tapped out there. And it's discovering stuff that's been forgotten and yet is the foundation for building a new future. So in this case, the stories they found, and story finding, by the way, is an important term. Storytelling implies someone sort of giving it to you. Story finding means we can actually, think of what the Greeks did. They look up at the stars at night and found stories, found characters, found myths. The agency is on the side of the user. And that's what Carla did in this project. Let these kids go out and find stories and then put them on buildings. Another project that does something sort of similar is up in Montreal. It ran for a couple of years, Cité Mémoire. So this is in old Montreal, where the history, as a way to help envision the future of the city commissioned some artists to work with the public and find what the most interesting 50 historical moments of Montreal's history were, and then to tell that story by putting it on the sides of buildings and geolocating sound. So another great way to take things that are normally quite small and private. A story might be a bestseller, but we all read it in our bedroom or listen to it in our car. But in this case, the stories are on buildings and become sites for conversation. Especially since this, like the other project, was forward-focused, it's a great spark to get a community to see itself as it was and to imagine itself as it could be. So it's a really beautiful project. I've mostly been talking about iteration, worlding, but just to say on the prototyping side, there's some wonderful new tools, and they take the form of digital twinning. So this is a technology that engineers use to kind of build they have a real physical engine, and they send the data from how it's performing into a digital model, and then they can tweak it. They can tweak the digital model rather than tweaking the real engine and see what the implications would be. Well, that's now been scaled up. And since some of our cities are pretty, prolific producers of data, how much water is being used at any given moment, what's the ambient temperature, you name it, internet usage, how many phones are in use, all that kind of data can be modeled, can be aggregated. Okay, one way is as a diagnostic and to sort of see what's happening and is there a problem? What would happen if we increased the water supply or electricity supply or diminished it? But you can also use this as a prototyping tool to sort of imagine, how do we fix a problem? Let's see what the implications would be. Digital twinning has huge potential for social change that's untapped. So it's a terrific tool in the prototyping sector. And one last example, urban change is not easy, and I've been visiting. We have a lab one of my lab's partners is in Colombia, in Medellin. Medellin, if the name means anything to you, it's like cocaine and murder, and it really was the murder capital of South America until about 25 years ago. And it is transformed. It's shocking to see the place. There's still a lot of poverty, and I interviewed a ton of pretty poor people. And what was so shocking was that across the board, they shared a vision. They shared a narrative. We're on the way up. This is going to be the Silicon Valley of South America. It was stunning to me. And what happened essentially are things like the biggest prison, there was the largest women's prison in Medellin, lost its status as a prison, and was rebuilt and became a little, not unlike this place we're in now, became a public education center. You can go to university for free for a year, then you got to go back to your job. And if after that year on the job you still want to learn, you can come back for another year. And so they've really found a way to kind of get people that are working on the job into the education system in ways that make sense to them. You learn what you need to learn for whatever your vision of your own future is. All the institutions in Medellin have been on this together. I should say their mayors, their last couple of mayors, have all been engineers, not politicians, engineers. These are technocrats. I'm usually a little wary of them, but boy, this is proof that they can do some wonderful stuff. They've managed to get all the institutions in the city to work together. The universities, the museums, the hospitals, the former prisons, working together. This is a good example. This is a museum. This is a science museum. And they have really cool stuff and a lot of speakers and everything a science museum would do. But they also have hackathons for housewives, where you bring your broken appliances. You have a toaster that doesn't work. You have an egg beater that stopped beating. Bring it in and try to fix it. And you learn, like, basic stuff about how to fix it. And if you can't fix it, what else can we make with it? How can we take the parts and make something else? Coding for kids, a big thing. There's all these programs to get kids to be coders as part of this Silicon Valley narrative that they have. I have to say, I was so deeply impressed by this. This is not a transformation that's just top down. They have embraced everyone. Housewives, kids, a lot of stuff pitched at girls in a Latino culture. That's something, I guess. To try to get this narrative across at the grassroots and let it bubble upwards, as opposed to just force feeding it from on high. So a really good example of working together with everyone to construct a vision of the future and then get people to put their hands in it together and make it happen. So just want to close out with this. What does this mean for us? It means rethinking the way we do business, rethinking some of our language, directors and heads and all the stuff, the hierarchical structure of some of our organizations might be better rethought by having people be ego managers or curators or collaboration designers, cat herders. This does require sort of a refitting of, yeah, cat herder. It's spent too many years. Henry and I have spent too many years on that job. Okay, well, that's it. So yeah, thank you. I think good luck to you. This is such an impressive and inspiring project. Good luck.